Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald was a literary genius and a complex figure who became one of the most celebrated yet tragic writers of American literature. F. Scott Fitzgerald, novelist and short story writer, was born in St. Paul, Minnesota on September 24, 1896. He came from a middle-class family with pretensions to higher social standing. He had a romantic sensibility and an obsession with wealth and status that would define both his life and his work. Fitzgerald's early years were marked by ambition and a desperate desire for recognition. He attended Princeton University beginning in 1913, though he never graduated. His time at Princeton shaped his understanding of class, privilege, and the American dream, themes that would dominate his fiction. He was acutely aware of his position as an outsider among the wealthy students who populated the campus. His family had enough money to send him to Princeton, but not enough to make him truly belong to the world he found there. At Princeton, Fitzgerald devoted more energy to his literary pursuits and social ambitions than to his studies. He wrote for the Princeton Triangle Club, a musical comedy troupe, and contributed to the Princeton Tiger Humor magazine and the Nassau Literary magazine. These activities brought him some of the recognition he craved, but his poor academic performance put him on academic probation. In 1917, with America's entry into World War I and his academic career in shambles, Fitzgerald left Princeton without graduating to accept a commission as a second lieutenant in the infantry. Fitzgerald was convinced he would die in the war and rushed to complete a novel before shipping overseas. He wrote furiously during training periods, producing a manuscript he called The Romantic Egotist. The novel was a thinly veiled autobiography about his experiences at Princeton and his romantic disappointments. He submitted it to Charles Scribner's Sons, where it was read by editor Maxwell Perkins. Though Perkins saw promise in the young writer, the manuscript was rejected. Fitzgerald revised and resubmitted it, only to be rejected again. These rejections were crushing, but Perkins encouraged him to continue writing. While stationed at Camp Sheridan near Montgomery, Alabama, Fitzgerald met Zelda Sayer at a country club dance in July 1918. Zelda was the youngest daughter of an Alabama Supreme Court judge, a beautiful and vivacious Southern belle who was the center of attention wherever she went. Fitzgerald fell desperately in love with her almost immediately. She represented everything he desired: beauty, status, and the glamorous life he had always dreamed of living. For Fitzgerald, winning Zelda became as important as achieving literary success. The two ambitions were intertwined in his mind. Zelda was attracted to Fitzgerald but hesitant to commit to a man with uncertain prospects. She enjoyed his attention and his romantic intensity, but she was also practical. She had grown up in comfort and was not willing to marry into poverty. She wanted the excitement and luxury that wealth could provide. This dynamic, of Fitzgerald desperately pursuing a beautiful woman who withheld her commitment until he could prove his worth, would become a central theme in his fiction, most notably in The Great Gatsby. The war ended in November 1918 before Fitzgerald saw combat. He was discharged from the army in February 1919 and moved to New York City to make his fortune. He took a job writing advertising copy for the Baron Collier Agency, earning $90 a month. He lived in a cheap room and spent his evenings writing short stories, which he submitted to magazines hoping for publication and the money it would bring. The stories were rejected. He was miserable, poor, and separated from Zelda, who remained in Montgomery. Fitzgerald returned to Alabama in June 1919 to convince Zelda to marry him, but she broke off the engagement. She could not commit to a life of poverty with a struggling writer. The rejection devastated Fitzgerald. He returned to his parents' home in St. Paul and quit his advertising job, determined to revise his novel one more time. He worked obsessively through the summer of 1919, transforming The Romantic Egotist into This Side of Paradise. In September 1919, Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's accepted the revised manuscript for publication. Fitzgerald was ecstatic. He immediately wrote to Zelda with the news, and she agreed to reconsider the engagement. With a book contract in hand and short stories beginning to sell to magazines like the Saturday Evening Post, Fitzgerald's financial prospects improved dramatically. Zelda agreed to marry him. This Side of Paradise was published on March 26, 1920, just days before Fitzgerald's 24th birthday. The novel was an immediate sensation. It captured the spirit of the younger generation emerging from the shadow of World War I, a generation eager to break from Victorian conventions and embrace new freedoms. The book's semi-autobiographical protagonist, Amory Blaine, became a spokesman for what Fitzgerald would later name the Jazz Age. The novel sold out its first printing within days and made Fitzgerald famous almost overnight. Scott and Zelda were married on April 3, 1920, in New York City. They immediately became celebrities, embodying the glamorous, reckless spirit of the new decade. They lived extravagantly, staying in expensive hotels, attending endless parties, and spending money as quickly as Fitzgerald could earn it. They jumped into fountains, rode on the tops of taxis, and generally behaved in ways designed to attract attention. The press loved them. They became symbols of youth, beauty, and the new American prosperity. Fitzgerald's second novel, The Beautiful and Damned, was published in 1922. The book told the story of Anthony and Gloria Patch, a beautiful couple who destroy themselves through idleness and excess while waiting to inherit a fortune. The parallels to Scott and Zelda's own marriage were obvious to everyone, including the Fitzgeralds themselves. The novel was successful but received more mixed reviews than his debut. Critics noted Fitzgerald's talent but questioned whether he had anything substantial to say beyond chronicling the lives of wealthy, careless young people. During this period, Fitzgerald was also writing short stories prolifically. The Saturday Evening Post paid him substantial fees for his stories, sometimes as much as $4,000 per story. These stories provided the income that supported the Fitzgeralds' extravagant lifestyle. However, Fitzgerald was increasingly aware that he was writing commercial fiction to pay the bills while his serious literary ambitions went unfulfilled. He wanted to write a novel that would establish him as a major American writer, not just a popular entertainer. In 1924, the Fitzgeralds moved to France, joining the community of American expatriate writers and artists in Paris and on the French Riviera. They hoped that living abroad would be cheaper and would allow Fitzgerald to focus on his writing without the distractions of New York society. In reality, they continued to live extravagantly and drink heavily. Their marriage was becoming increasingly troubled. Zelda resented Scott's success and wanted achievements of her own. Scott was jealous and possessive, and his drinking was getting worse. Despite the chaos of their personal lives, Fitzgerald was working on the novel that would become The Great Gatsby. He wrote and revised obsessively, crafting every sentence with care. This was the book that would prove he was a serious artist, not just a popular entertainer. Maxwell Perkins provided editorial guidance, and Fitzgerald revised extensively, even making changes to the galley proofs. The Great Gatsby was published on April 10, 1925. The novel told the story of Jay Gatsby, a mysterious millionaire who throws lavish parties at his Long Island mansion in hopes of winning back his lost love, Daisy Buchanan. Through Gatsby's tragedy, Fitzgerald explored themes of the American dream, class, wealth, and the corruption that wealth brings. The prose was lyrical and controlled, a major advance over his earlier work. The novel was Fitzgerald's masterpiece. However, The Great Gatsby was not an immediate commercial success. It received respectful reviews, with some critics recognizing its brilliance, but it sold fewer than 25,000 copies in Fitzgerald's lifetime. The disappointing sales devastated him. He had poured everything into this novel, and the public seemed indifferent. The book did not earn enough to cover his advance from Scribner's. He was forced to return to writing short stories to pay his debts. The years following Gatsby were difficult for the Fitzgeralds. They continued to live in Europe, moving between France and Switzerland. Scott's drinking became more serious, and Zelda's mental health began to deteriorate. She became obsessed with ballet, practicing for hours each day despite having started too late in life to become a professional dancer. The intensity of her focus worried Scott, but he did not fully understand what was happening to her. In 1930, Zelda suffered her first serious mental breakdown. She was hospitalized in Switzerland and diagnosed with schizophrenia, though modern doctors have questioned this diagnosis. She would spend much of the rest of her life in and out of psychiatric hospitals. Her illness was devastating for both of them. Scott felt guilty, wondering if their wild lifestyle and his own behavior had contributed to her breakdown. Zelda resented being treated as a patient and wanted to pursue her own creative work. During Zelda's hospitalizations, Fitzgerald struggled to work. He was drinking heavily and having difficulty writing. He was also deeply in debt, with medical bills for Zelda's treatment and his own expensive habits. He continued to write short stories for magazines, but the quality of his work was declining. Editors who had once eagerly accepted anything he wrote now rejected his submissions or asked for extensive revisions. In 1934, Fitzgerald published Tender is the Night, his first novel in 9 years. The book told the story of Dick Diver, a brilliant psychiatrist who marries a wealthy patient and slowly destroys himself through his devotion to her and his inability to resist the corrupting influence of wealth. The novel drew heavily on Fitzgerald's experiences with Zelda's illness and their life among the wealthy expatriates of the French Riviera. It was his most ambitious and complex work. Tender is the Night received mixed reviews and poor sales. Some critics recognized its merits, but many found it depressing and outdated. The country was in the midst of the Great Depression, and stories about the problems of wealthy Americans seemed irrelevant. Fitzgerald was crushed by the novel's failure. He had worked on it for years, revising and reworking it constantly, and he believed it was his best work. The public's indifference felt like a final judgment on his career. The mid-1930s were the darkest period of Fitzgerald's life. He was drinking heavily, his health was failing, and he was financially desperate. Zelda was institutionalized, and he was living alone in Baltimore, struggling to write. In 1936, he published a series of essays in Esquire magazine collectively known as The Crack-Up. In these brutally honest pieces, he wrote about his sense of failure, his alcoholism, and his feeling that he had wasted his talent. The essays shocked his friends and damaged his reputation further. Many people felt he was indulging in public self-pity. In 1937, desperate for money, Fitzgerald moved to Hollywood to work as a screenwriter. The movie studios paid well, and he hoped to pay off his debts and perhaps find new material for his fiction. He worked on various scripts, including Three Comrades, for which he received screen credit. However, he struggled with the collaborative nature of screenwriting and with the studio system's demands. His drinking interfered with his work, and he developed a reputation as unreliable. In Hollywood, Fitzgerald met Sheila Graham, a British-born gossip columnist. They began a relationship that would last for the rest of his life. Graham was supportive and tried to help him control his drinking. With her encouragement, Fitzgerald began working on a new novel, The Last Tycoon, based on his experiences in Hollywood. The novel would tell the story of Monroe Starr, a brilliant young movie producer based partly on Irving Thalberg. Fitzgerald worked on the manuscript with renewed energy, believing he could produce another masterpiece. However, Fitzgerald's health was deteriorating. Years of heavy drinking had damaged his heart and his overall constitution. He suffered a heart attack in late 1940 but continued working on his novel. On December 21, 1940, while visiting Sheila Graham's apartment in Hollywood, Fitzgerald suffered a second heart attack. He died almost immediately. He was 44 years old. Fitzgerald's death received little attention. The obituaries were brief and often dismissive, treating him as a relic of the jazz age whose time had passed. His books were out of print, and he was largely forgotten by the reading public. He was buried in Rockville, Maryland. Zelda, still institutionalized, outlived him by 8 years. She died in a hospital fire in 1948. The Last Tycoon was published posthumously in 1941, edited by Edmund Wilson from Fitzgerald's incomplete manuscript. Even in its unfinished state, the novel showed flashes of his old brilliance and suggested what he might have achieved had he lived to complete it. In the years following his death, Fitzgerald's reputation underwent a remarkable resurrection. During World War II, armed services editions of The Great Gatsby were distributed to soldiers, introducing a new generation to his work. Critics and scholars began to reassess his novels, particularly The Great Gatsby, recognizing qualities they had missed or undervalued during his lifetime. By the 1950s, Fitzgerald was recognized as one of the great American writers of the 20th century. The Great Gatsby became required reading in high schools and universities across America. It was recognized as the great American novel, a perfect distillation of American themes and dreams. The book's exploration of wealth, class, and the corruption of the American dream seemed more relevant with each passing decade. Its prose style, economical yet lyrical, influenced generations of writers. Modern scholars have also given Tender is the Night more serious attention, recognizing it as a complex and ambitious work that deserves to stand alongside The Great Gatsby. Fitzgerald's short stories, particularly masterpieces like Babylon Revisited and The Rich Boy, are studied as examples of the form at its finest. His essays, including the crack-up pieces, are valued for their honesty and insight into the creative process. Fitzgerald's life has become almost as famous as his work. His relationship with Zelda, their glamorous yet destructive lifestyle, and his struggle with alcoholism have been the subject of numerous biographies, plays, and films. They remain symbols of the jazz age, of American literary ambition, and of the price of fame and excess. Historians and critics have debated Fitzgerald's relationship with Zelda and its impact on both their lives and his work. Some have portrayed Zelda as a victim of Scott's jealousy and need for control. Others have noted that their relationship was more complex, with both partners contributing to their mutual destruction. What is clear is that they were profoundly important to each other and that their marriage was both an inspiration and an obstacle to their creative work. Fitzgerald's legacy is that of a writer who captured a particular moment in American history while creating works that transcended that moment. His best work explores timeless themes of aspiration, disillusionment, love, and loss. He wrote about wealth and glamour with both attraction and moral clarity, understanding the appeal of the glittering world while recognizing its emptiness and corruption. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Fitzgerald's life was that he died believing himself a failure. He could not have known that within a decade of his death, he would be recognized as one of America's greatest writers. He could not have known that The Great Gatsby, which sold so poorly during his lifetime, would become one of the most widely read novels in American literature, selling hundreds of thousands of copies every year. Fitzgerald represents a particular type of artist, the romantic who is both attracted to and repelled by the world of wealth and glamour. He wanted success and recognition, yet he understood the emptiness at the heart of material success. This contradiction gave his work its power and his life its tragic dimension. He could neither fully embrace nor fully reject the world he wrote about so brilliantly. In the end, Francis Scott Fitzgerald was a writer of extraordinary talent who achieved greatness despite personal demons and professional disappointments. His best work has endured because it speaks to fundamental human experiences and American dreams. He is remembered today not as the failed writer he believed himself to be at his death, but as one of the masters of American literature, a writer whose work continues to move and inspire readers nearly a century after it was written. Fitzgerald was, in death as in life, a man of contradictions, remembered for his failures and excesses but celebrated ultimately for the beauty and truth of his art.